How's it going, everyone? My name is Ernesto, and I'm going to be talking about La Segunda Marquetalia, which is a terrorist organization located out in Colombia. Let's get started. First and foremost, who are they? The first start of this organization came about in 2019, where three leaders, three people and one leader came about, claiming that Colombia's peace agreement had been broken or had been very wrongfully wronged, and that they were not going to stand for that, and that they were going to basically try and rectify that. So among these leaders were Luciano Marin Arango, Seuxis Pausias Hernandez, Hernanda Rio Velasquez, and Henry Garzon. Some trivia is that their name comes from a location in Colombia where FARC was formed back in 1964. And for those of you who do not know or might not know, FARC, F-A-R-C, stands for Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. This is essentially the People's Army of Colombia. And the reason this peace agreement was so pivotal at the time that it was made in 2012 is because prior to that they've been at war with the Colombian government for a little over 50 years. So it's crazy to think that they only were able to come out with an agreement many decades after. So I thought that was another interesting thing to mention, and another reason why I wanted to pick this group amongst their media presence in the U.S., which I'll be going over in this presentation. They're the leaders. Here they are. Starting from the top left, you'll have Arango, then on the bottom, Jesus Santrich, El Paisa in the middle, and Romaña on the right. The bottom three are all dead. They recently died in 2021. Closest ones were Santrich and El Paisa, who were recently killed in December, so not too long ago, in 21. Another key thing that links all of these people together is that they are very known in Colombia for criminal activity. Obviously, they all have ties to drugs and drug smuggling. I believe that they are on the U.S. criminals list of people to watch, or were, at least for the three bottoms. After the recent attacks, it is worth noting that Arango did go into hiding, and there are many news articles suggesting that his days are numbered, and that with all of these killings, there's basically very little left on this group. So it's on very shaky legs at the moment, and all the backing, if any backing they still have, could pull out at any moment. What is their goal? Their goal, as they mentioned in their video when they came out, deciding to bear arms again, is to unify all the ex-FARC groups into one group. Obviously, with them as the main leaders, distributing out orders and attacks to make. And the bigger the group, the more easy it is to plan out attacks, and not even that, just to have more unison communication and really get their voices, I mentioned, heard throughout. It is also worth noting that it's easier to control internal conflict as well as outside conflict, but as I've read from many of the sources that I've gathered, it's really 50-50. The Segunda Marquetalia did not have many good relations with other ex-FARC groups, which could prove to be a problem because this is what they're trying to do. They want to unify all of the groups into one solid one to carry out more dominant control of Colombia. But it's going to be very tricky, because if you can't have good relationships with some of the other groups, when you take them by force, it's not going to be well received. And with that in mind, it's also worth noting that some of the sources that I've read have also come to the conclusion that it's very much their competition that has tried to carry on these killings, which is why some of the members like Santrich and Elbaisa have been killed. Santrich, I believe, was killed on Venezuelan soil after, I believe there's an article that mentions that some of the other ex-FARC groups have gathered intelligence from inside the Marquetalia, which also could explain why they were able to find the location of Santrich. And yeah, I mean, for some time now, this group has been allowed to to carry out their business on the border of Venezuela and Colombia. Again, these groups are spread out all over Colombia, so it's not too out of reach to really try and conceive that idea that they were able to infiltrate the Marquetalia to get some of this info out and to really plan out an attack such as this. And I think that this is just very interesting, because the original goal of FARC was to protect the people, fighting for their rights and trying to stop any violence by being basically their front line of defense. And I just thought it was interesting because this is also what they mentioned. They mentioned that they wanted to give power back to the people, when that's essentially what the government is for. But obviously, things are very tricky in South America, so this is not the first country that has faced problems like this. You have other countries such as Venezuela, who's like right next door to them, who have also come into like a lot of government issues. And I just think it's interesting because a lot of these organizations claim that they want to help the people, or better yet, serve the people. But in doing so, they cause a lot of fatalities and casualties to the people that they're so-called trying to help. And I just thought it was worth noting. Moving on to Hardships. The group is currently dealing with a very messy ordeal, as I've gone over right now. 3 of their leaders have prominently been killed, so this leaves you to believe that they are not doing so well. The media coverage is there as well on the South American side, and you're hearing stories left and right about this and that. Stories overseas are also mentioning, such as BBC, who are talking about how the remaining leader is probably very frightened, and as he should be, because if they were able to reach those 3 people who are key leaders to this group and held a lot of power and say, what's to say that they can't get to him, or what's to say that today, tomorrow could be his very last day here on this earth. So a lot of this puts a lot of stress onto the group. It is also worth noting that they don't have a lot of people. They do have some number, but it's nothing compared to the other organizations out there right now in Colombia. So that's another issue that is definitely not helping them anytime soon. Money is also another issue, being that these people are criminals. Their money comes from specifically drug trafficking and everything, so it's always 50-50 depending on whether or not they'll continue to have such the money to really keep funding their goal. So it's another thing to keep on the lookout for. In terms of media coverage, as I mentioned before, the U.S. haven't really covered a lot or a great deal. I believe there's an article that I used for information from Atlanta I believe maybe ABC as well. I know that there's a video from ABC where they mentioned that right now, with Joe Biden, he recently paid a visit to Colombia to talk with the president and everything. And it's worth noting that the relationships between both countries are what the video mentions as an all-time high. Could prove to be why they don't want to do a mass coverage on this story, because if you cover it, you're going to get a lot of stories that could implicate Colombia in a bad way, which is something that you don't want to do, especially if you're in good relationships with them at the moment. Another thing to note is Venezuela is allies with Russia, so with that said, it is something that should be on everyone's mind, especially with how everything is right now. You don't want to really upset the rival country and then perhaps increase more tensions. Especially since it is worth noting that the Venezuelan president also wants to have better ties with the U.S. It was mentioned in another article that he wants to further strengthen the relations and aims on doing so. This all comes at a very tricky time because Venezuela has ties with Iran in the sense that they've been provided drones, and these drones can be carried out for a number of horrible situations, such as attacks. You could do a lot with drones nowadays, so drone attacks are a very big one. I know there are articles out there suggesting that you could become a very big threat with the use of them. And the fact that Venezuela was provided some from Iran is very alarming, especially with Colombia right next door. And another thing to note is that Venezuela currently does have one of the most oil reserves. And I know that right now everyone's fiending over the gas prices. I know just this last weekend I was seeing some of the prices outside, and they spike anywhere from 380 to mid 430s. So if that were the case of Venezuela, they want to increase better relations or better ties with the U.S., then I do believe that that's something that would come into play, the gas prices. So I think that a lack of the media coverage has to do with a lot of that, and yeah, just that. It is crazy though, because other outside countries have covered the story. So you have anywhere from the likes of BBC, which is UK based, to other countries as well trying to cover the story. Now again, there isn't a big coverage on it. There's a mention of it, but they do produce articles much more than what I was able to find on US sources, which is kind of interesting. But nevertheless, that's what I have in terms of media coverage. And yeah, in terms of the class theories that we covered during the course of the semester, I thought that I would probably use framing and political agenda, just because, as I mentioned, it's very, very tricky right now. Kind of reminds you of like a House of Cards situation where, you know, every move is kind of planned out kind of 2-3 steps ahead. So if there's not a lot of media coverage on this story, odds are it's because, you know, the president wants it like that, the administration wants it like that. So political agenda is one of them, because, you know, you don't want to ruin a good thing, and right now the relationships are in a good place, so you don't want to rock the boat too much. And if you think about it, you also don't want to cause too much friction with the neighbors, which happens to be Venezuela, because, like I mentioned, the president does want better relations, and if you do end up getting into further talks, you might be able to, you know, deal out a bargain with gas. So better oil prices means better gas for us, and Yeah, especially since right now the president is coming to into some fire with all this with all these price gouges. Framing is another theory, just because it ties in with the political agenda, which right now, with everything going on, you don't really want to butt into a lot of people's business. You have situations in Europe getting a little hectic with everything happening in Ukraine, and then down here in South America, framing could be another good one. With the South American news outlets, you get very mixed stories, at least from what I've seen. In terms of some of the stories that have been carried out by the BBC, it already mentions that the leader, for example, St. Rich, had already been killed. He was pronounced dead. And then if you take a look at an article from South America, it's the opposite. You have headlines being that he's not dead, or that his death is not confirmed. Now, while this is technically true, some of the articles do mention that they won't go right away to pronouncing him dead until they see the body. So this is all framing, and then again, political agenda in terms of Colombia, because maybe the president wants, maybe the president is trying to run for a second term, or maybe someone's, trying to run opposed from him, and a lot of this is not really good for his political game or his move. So a lot of I thought these two things that we covered in class were very pivotal to this organization, to this project. And while I was doing the research, I thought that it was one of the two that really stood out to me in terms of coverage. So this was my presentation.